I was reading an article about Anthony Joshua, and it tried to make the claim that losing to Usyk was worse than Andy Ruiz Jr. And I'm going to say bullshit to that, because Andy Ruiz Jr. had never done anything close to what Usyk has done. Usyk has already been undisputed. Usyk has moved up to heavyweight and already fought. He beat Derek Chisora, who, whether you like him or not, has always been a top 10 fighter. He's always remained in the rankings. Arguably, he just beat Joseph Parker. No, scratch that. There's no argument to it. He did just beat Joseph Parker and got robbed on the scorecards, and now he's having to do it again, which is BS given his age. He beat him decisively, in my opinion, not even close. But moving past that, we all know that Usyk is, I would say, arguably the most technical boxer at heavyweight now that he moved up. As far as his skills, technical, ring IQ, all that, superior. He beats Andy Ruiz Jr. in all those categories. And I would be willing to bet that if Andy Ruiz Jr. got in there with Usyk, he would make him look foolish. He would make him look way worse than AJ. He would outbox him with ease. And there's not much Andy Ruiz would be able to do because, unlike Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz Jr. would be shorter than Usyk. Not taller than, not longer than, but shorter, with a much shorter reach. So it would be even easier for Usyk to outbox him, in my opinion. I think it's an easy fight, and I think he embarrasses Andy Ruiz. But moving past that, so no, this loss right here was a loss that I said would happen, and it's a loss that a very few other people said that probably would happen. More than likely, Usyk would pull it out by decision. A couple of people out there thought by knockout, but I wasn't thinking that a knockout would happen unless it happened late due to exhaustion. But when AJ fought Andy Ruiz the first time, nobody was picking Andy Ruiz Jr. to beat AJ. Even when the rematch rolled around, even after AJ had got knocked out by him, nobody was picking Andy Ruiz Jr. to beat him. So that is one of those losses that you look at as a fluke. It was a fluke because AJ was beating Andy Ruiz Jr. until he got sloppy and got caught and just never recovered. He was beating him. He hit him with one clean shot and put him on his ass. And had he not rushed in there for the kill, I'd imagine that he would have knocked him out at some point in time in that first fight. But he got sloppy, got reckless, got caught, and paid for it. However, in the second match, Andy Ruiz Jr. couldn't even touch him. Now, when it comes to Usyk, there was no point in time that AJ put Usyk on his ass. There was no point in time to where you thought Usyk was about to get knocked out or lose the fight. No, Usyk came in there and did something that Andy Ruiz Jr. could not do. He outboxed him. But again, this is a guy who people will argue is the most technical boxer at the heavyweight division. Now again, that he moved up. So this is not a worse loss than Andy Ruiz Jr. Andy Ruiz Jr. is the worst loss on Anthony Joshua's record. And if Anthony Joshua was to go on to lose to Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury or Dillian White, guess what? Andy Ruiz Jr. would still be the worst loss on his record because all of those guys have done more than Andy Ruiz. I'm sorry. No, I disagree. It does not matter that Usyk moved up. Usyk had already had 2 heavyweight fights and had been waiting a while to fight AJ even after Chisora. So he is a heavyweight. He is not a cruiserweight anymore. He moved up. He won his 2 fights. First one, got a corner stoppage, so that was a knockout to his record. Second one, he had a lot of dirty tactics done to him. He weathered the storm and came out on top to outbox Chisora. He's a heavyweight. So, no, AJ did not suffer a worse loss. This is the type of loss that it's the best fighting the best and somebody's got to lose. And unfortunately for AJ, that somebody was him. But this is by far not a worse loss than Andy Ruiz Jr. It just shows how good Usyk is. That's all this does. It doesn't take away from Anthony Joshua's greatness. It doesn't take away from it at all. Because at the end of the day, had AJ never lost to Andy Ruiz Jr., he still would have lost to Usyk. He still would lose to Usyk because Usyk is that good. So instead of trying to discredit Anthony Joshua for losing to somebody as great as Usyk, why don't people fall back and realize how good Usyk actually is? I've said a million times, I don't like the way he fights. I've always said I call it death by a thousand pillows. He wears you out. He gets you tired. He works you. And he's pretty much like a pick to a mountain until it crumbles. I don't enjoy it, but I respect the way he fights. And I can acknowledge that he is one of the best. I said it whenever he was a cruiserweight. I give him and I tip my hat all day. Just because I don't like the way he fights doesn't mean that he's not a great fighter, because he is. And if he goes on to beat Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury, if he can beat AJ in the rematch, then he very well could go down as the greatest cruiserweight, not taking anything away from Holyfield. But, I mean, from my understanding, Evander Holyfield was never undisputed, I don't think. Maybe he was. I know he beat Buster Douglas, so maybe he did. Maybe Buster Douglas got all the titles from Tyson. I would have to look it up. But there's an argument to be had between Usyk and Evander. Evander is a 5-time champion, but here's the thing about it. In order to be a 5-time champion, you have to lose your belt 4 times. If Usyk stays undefeated, now you have to ask yourself, what's greater? Being undefeated, beating the top heavyweights, or losing the title and coming back to regain the title? So there will definitely be an argument to be had and a case to be made for Usyk if he can defeat the other top guys at heavyweight. I don't know how much longer he'll stay at the heavyweight division in boxing in general because of his age. He may fight Anthony Joshua one more time, and if he defeats him, fight for undisputed. And then 9 times out of 10, there'll be another rematch clause on that. And then he'll have another fight, and that'll probably be it for him. So I don't imagine that he's going to stay around for too much longer, just because there's nothing left for him to prove once he does that, unless he needs money. It always comes back down financially. If he needs the money, then by all means keep fighting. But if he's financially straight, good, fine, and he can retire, I believe he would retire after winning undisputed. I don't even know if he comes back for the rematch if he wins the first time, because in my opinion, there's no real reason to. He did what he had to do. He got all the belts at cruiserweight, moved up, and got all the belts at heavyweight. Case closed. But again, to come back full circle to what this is really about, because it's not about Usyk. It's about the loss that Anthony Joshua suffered. By far, this is not a bad loss to have. This is a learning lesson type of loss. This is you getting in there with the better man, and Usyk proved to be the better man. Now, AJ can get it together. If he can come out victorious in the rematch, then it only shows you how great AJ is, because I guarantee you, if Usyk sticks around, if he loses the rematch, he'll go on to fight somebody like Joe Joyce or Dillian White or Deontay Wilder. If he loses to Tyson Fury, and I think people may be surprised how fucking good Usyk is whenever he starts racking up other wins against other heavyweights that are considered at the top. Now, the only one, and this is what's funny, I always say this and then I stop rambling after this because I'm getting off topic, but I just want to say this. I believe still Anthony Joshua beats Deontay Wilder. I think Tyson Fury will beat him, although I don't know how hard Tyson Fury's been training these last almost 2 years, and I know Deontay Wilder's been training like a madman. So he very well could win, but I think Tyson Fury wins the trilogy. I believe Dillian White knocks out Deontay Wilder. With that being said, Fury, Dillian White, and Tyson Fury, and Anthony Joshua. Those 3, I believe, all beat Deontay Wilder. However, when it comes to Usyk, I believe Usyk very well could beat Tyson Fury because I've seen the chink in his armor against shorter guys at heavyweight. And Usyk would be considered short at 6'3" at heavyweight. I believe that he can beat Dillian White because Dillian White is very susceptible to uppercuts straight down the pipe. And we've seen how Usyk picked AJ apart straight down the pipe. And I believe Usyk can also beat Anthony Joshua because he's already done it. So that right there is already proof in the pudding. He's done it. So he definitely can beat him again because he's already done it once. However, I believe Deontay Wilder is the only heavyweight that can beat Usyk at the top. I don't think Joe Joyce can do it because Usyk's already beat Joe Joyce. Although he beat him years ago, it still was in 10-ounce gloves with no headgear. They may have called it amateur, but it was professional style. And he beat him. He beat him pretty easily. So, again, I believe Deontay Wilder is the only person who can possibly beat Usyk at heavyweight just because of how quick Deontay Wilder can deliver his punches. I think he's the only one that's going to be fast enough to catch him. I don't think Fury's fast enough. I think he gets inside of Fury, and that's just that. And I don't think he'll let Fury grab him like Wilder did because he's too skilled for that. So again, if Usyk is as good as he has proven to be, sounds redundant, I know, because he is great, then the loss to Usyk is not a bad loss to have. Because Usyk very well could go down as one of the best cruiserweights of all time, a Hall of Famer. He's already a Hall of Famer with this win. So again, losing to a guy like Usyk does not hurt your career. It's just he was the better man. Now, it could also make his career great, Anthony Joshua, because if Anthony Joshua comes back and dominates Usyk in the rematch, then just like another British fighter, Lennox Lewis, who had 2 losses as well. What did Lennox do? He lost twice and came back and avenged both his losses, and people still consider him great. So I find it weird that people are already rating off Anthony Joshua just because he has 2 losses. Because again, how can people call Lennox Lewis, the last undisputed heavyweight champion, great when he has the same amount of losses as AJ? Now, I believe both his losses came by knockout. AJ may have got 1 loss by knockout, but the other one was by decision that he just got. Lennox Lewis got knocked the fuck out twice and arguably should have lost his last fight. He got saved by the judges and the referee and the doctor over a cut that wasn't even impeding Klitschko, because Klitschko was giving him the work, and had that continued, I guarantee you Lennox would have got knocked out again. So he got saved from his 3rd loss, which ended up being his last fight because he didn't want a rematch. So again, you cannot say Lennox Lewis was great and then shit on AJ because he has 2 losses, just like Lennox Lewis. I find it funny, and I go on tangents because people that like to talk shit about these fighters don't even really know about other fighters that they talk highly about. It's just ridiculous to me. But again, to come full circle, no. The Andy Ruiz loss was much worse than an Usyk loss. Usyk is a much better fighter than Andy Ruiz, and it's highly doubtful, outside of Andy Ruiz being the first Mexican heavyweight, even though he was born in America. Outside of that, I don't even know. That's the only reason why anybody's going to remember him. He sure as hell isn't going to be remembered for what he's done in boxing other than that. That's it. Usyk's going to be remembered for clearing out the cruiserweight division and what could be very soon the heavyweight division. Think about that. And don't forget, hit the thumbs up, sub, and notification bell.